Rehana Al Safar was the perfect Dubai wife, graceful, poised, and fiercely protective of her reputation. Haris Karam was her successful husband with secrets buried beneath designer suits and late-night meetings. Jasmine Villacorte was the quiet maid whose presence seemed harmless until a forbidden affair ignited a chain of betrayal and murder. In a city where image is everything, one deadly secret would unravel an entire life of luxury. Rehana Al Safar had always believed in order. From the white orchids lining her marble staircase to the perfectly folded linens in her walk-in closet, her world ran like a well-oiled machine. Her villa in the upscale Al Barari community of Dubai reflected that same precision: glass walls, whisper-quiet fountains, and silence that echoed calm. On the outside, everything looked perfect, but perfection has a way of cracking without warning. Haris Karam, her husband of 17 years, had built a name for himself in Dubai's bustling real estate scene. With his charm and strategic mind, he climbed the ladder swiftly. They were once inseparable, powerful, elegant, respected. Rehana stood beside him at every gala, every business inauguration, wearing subtle smiles and designer silks, but lately that bond had begun to feel more like a performance than a partnership. Haris had grown distant over the past few months. It started with missed dinners, then business trips that came without notice, and finally the late-night phone calls answered in hushed tones. He would return home with the scent of unfamiliar cologne and excuses too thin to believe. Rehana, though wounded, kept her emotions buried deep. She had learned long ago that public image mattered more than personal turmoil, but she was no fool. Something was wrong, and it was growing like mold under the surface of her pristine life. When Jasmine Villacorte arrived, things shifted subtly. A 23-year-old Filipina, she came highly recommended by a domestic agency that catered to Dubai's elite. She was quiet, polite, and remarkably efficient. Rehana barely noticed her in the beginning, apart from her neatly tied hair and the way she always walked with her head slightly bowed. Jasmine took over household tasks quickly: laundry, cleaning, even cooking simple meals. Haris hardly acknowledged her presence during the first week, or so it seemed. Then the small things started to add up. Rehana began to notice Jasmine's sudden change in appearance. Her once simple clothes became slightly more fitted. She wore lipstick some mornings, barely noticeable, but there. One afternoon, Rehana spotted Haris and Jasmine exchanging glances in the hallway, fleeting yet unmistakably intimate. It was the kind of look you only notice when you've already begun to suspect something. Rehana didn't confront anyone. Instead, she did what any woman raised in wealth and calculation would do. She gathered information. Without alerting anyone, she hired a technician to install small security cameras in discreet corners of the home: the hallway, the guest wing, the staircase landing. Nothing overt, nothing obvious, just enough to confirm or dispel her growing unease. It didn't take long. A week later, on a Tuesday afternoon, Haris called saying he had an urgent meeting in Abu Dhabi and wouldn't be home till late. Rehana nodded on the phone, her voice calm. Hours later, she watched the footage. Haris arrived back at the villa by noon. He wasn't alone for long. Jasmine entered the guest room moments after him. The door closed. They remained inside for over 2 hours. Rehana watched every second of that silent recording with a still face and a clenched jaw. Her hand trembled only once, when Jasmine exited the room, adjusting her dress and brushing her hair with her fingers. Haris followed minutes later, fixing his collar, his face unreadable. She copied the footage onto a flash drive, labeled it in faint handwriting, and tucked it beneath a tray in her jewelry box. There were no tears that night, only a dull, spreading coldness that seeped into the corners of her mind. From that moment, Rehana's world changed, not in fire or fury, but in silence, like the slow twisting of a knife. She began to plan, not out of rage, but with the chilling precision of someone who had waited long enough. No one knew, not yet, but Rehana had seen the truth, and it had broken something deep inside her that would never heal the same way again. The morning after Rehana watched the damning footage, everything in the villa moved as if nothing had changed. Jasmine prepared breakfast as usual: eggs, Arabic bread, and fresh fruit, and Haris sipped his coffee while scrolling through his phone, making small comments about work and traffic. Rehana sat across from him, nodding occasionally, wearing a soft pastel abaya, her face unreadable. Inside, though, something had shifted permanently. She wasn't thinking about betrayal anymore. She was thinking about control. Over the next few days, Rehana began cataloging behavior. Times Haris came home, how often Jasmine left the kitchen, who locked which door. She created a mental map of their habits. Jasmine would often linger around the study when Haris was home early, pretending to dust or bring water. Haris would casually ask her to check something in the guest wing, or mention a task that required her presence, always when Rehana was distracted. It was a pattern now, and it no longer surprised her. She didn't confront them. She didn't cry. Instead, she started digging further. She accessed Haris's financial statements and discovered a hidden account used to withdraw small but frequent amounts of cash. There were also recent purchases: designer perfume, a bracelet from a luxury brand, and 2 spa appointments booked under a false name. Jasmine, it seemed, had received more than just attention, but Rehana also knew that evidence alone wasn't enough. Dubai's elite didn't crumble from scandal. They were hardened by it. A mistress in the shadows wasn't rare, but a maid that crossed social lines. It was an affair wrapped in imbalance, deceit, and danger. Rehana knew this was more than humiliation. It was an insult to everything she had built. One evening, she stood outside in the garden, trimming a small foxglove plant growing near the marble wall. It had been planted years ago by her mother, a botanical enthusiast who believed every garden needed a hint of danger. Rehana touched the leaves gently. She had read about the plant before. Beautiful, toxic, and capable of silence. The next morning, Jasmine fell ill. It started shortly after breakfast. She became dizzy, pale, and weak. Rehana pretended to panic, calling for help and helping her onto the couch. Haris rushed down the stairs, genuinely shocked, lifting Jasmine in his arms and shouting for the driver. Within minutes, they were on their way to the hospital. Rehana stayed behind, claiming she would inform the agency and secure the villa. The house felt heavier after they left. The air still smelled faintly of the perfume Jasmine often wore, sweet and artificial. Rehana stood in the kitchen, alone, wiping the counter she had already cleaned, letting the silence wrap around her like a shawl. By noon, Haris called. Jasmine had been admitted in critical condition. The doctors suspected food poisoning, violent, fast-acting, and unusually severe. Rehana gasped softly, asking what she could do, offering to send clothes, toiletries, anything Jasmine might need. Haris mumbled something and hung up. He sounded exhausted and confused. By the next morning, Jasmine was dead. The hospital reported her death as acute food poisoning, likely from contaminated ingredients. Haris was devastated. His guilt was evident. He barely spoke, refused to eat, and locked himself in the study for hours. He hadn't expected this. Not like this. Rehana, meanwhile, became the pillar of strength. She contacted the maid agency, arranged for Jasmine's family to be notified, and even offered to cover the funeral costs. To outsiders, she was the grieving employer trying to handle an unexpected tragedy with grace. But something was already in motion. Unbeknownst to Rehana, someone else had begun to notice the strange coincidence of Jasmine's sudden death. Detective Adeel Rami, a quiet but sharp investigator in Dubai's Criminal Investigation Department, had come across the case while reviewing a list of hospital-reported unnatural deaths. Jasmine's name caught his eye, not because of who she was, but because of where she died. Al-Barari wasn't known for food poisoning. Detective Rami made a note and marked the file. What looked like a tragic accident was about to be unraveled, thread by thread, and he didn't know yet, neither did Rehana or Haris, that the truth wasn't just toxic. It was layered, buried, and dangerously close to the surface. Detective Adeel Rami had worked enough cases to know that the most dangerous crimes were often buried beneath layers of elegance and silence. When the report of Jasmine Villacorte's death came across his desk, it was labeled a medical incident, acute food poisoning. But something about the setting made him pause. Al-Barari was one of the most exclusive residential enclaves in Dubai. Cases from there rarely involved illness, let alone fatalities among live-in staff. It was a bubble of wealth, quiet, and secrets. He drove to the Karam residence under the pretense of conducting routine follow-up questions required by Dubai municipality. The villa was immaculate. High arches, green walls, and air that smelled of expensive incense. Rehana greeted him with poise, dressed in soft ivory, her voice calm and respectful. Haris, on the other hand, appeared disheveled, distracted, and emotionally depleted. He kept wiping his hands, nodding absently, eyes avoiding the detectives. Rehana spoke on their behalf. She explained Jasmine had been with them for a short while, was treated well, and had never shown signs of illness until that morning. She offered receipts from grocery stores and showed him their kitchen, clean, organized, sterile. Nothing seemed out of place, but Detective Rami had learned not to trust surfaces. Sometimes the most meticulous homes hid the darkest truths. He asked about Jasmine's belongings. Rehana handed over a small suitcase, neatly packed. There was little inside: basic clothes, a photograph of a younger Jasmine with two older women, and a gold bracelet with a delicate engraving. He held it up. The inscription read, "To JV, my heart always, HK." He didn't say a word about it then, just placed it into an evidence bag and thanked Rehana for her cooperation. Back at the station, Rami began to dig. He pulled Jasmine's employment history from the agency. She had worked for another household 2 years earlier, but had left suddenly without explanation. A note said, "Personal conflict with employer's relative." That employer's name? Mariam Noorani. A familiar name. Rehana Al Safar's best friend. The bracelet, the history, the high society connection. Rami was beginning to see shadows in the folds. Meanwhile, the hospital completed a deeper toxicology report. What they initially thought was food poisoning now appeared to be something far more deliberate. Jasmine had high levels of digitalis in her bloodstream, a compound found in certain plants including foxglove. Rami knew this wasn't something that appeared naturally in food. Someone had administered it. But how? He returned to the villa 2 days later with a search warrant. Rehana, still poised, allowed access. In the garden tucked behind the stone benches and water features were rows of exotic plants. Among them, a thriving foxglove plant stood tall, its violet bells catching the light. Rehana claimed it was ornamental, planted years ago by her late mother. She seemed almost nostalgic when she mentioned it. Rami ordered forensic samples to be taken. Back inside the house, he searched the rooms and personal belongings. In the guest wing where Jasmine often stayed, he found a hairbrush, a small bottle of jasmine oil, and a locked drawer. Inside was nothing but a small notebook. Scribbles, dates, and a rough sketch of what looked like a bracelet, a heart drawn beside initials, HK. While Rami worked silently through the villa, an anonymous envelope arrived at the Dubai police headquarters. No return address, no fingerprints, just a flash drive inside. On the drive was footage, grainy, silent, but clear. Haris entering the guest room, Jasmine following moments later. Hours unaccounted for behind a closed door. They weren't just having an affair, it was serious, hidden in plain sight. Detective Rami felt the pressure building. He had a dead maid, an illicit relationship, a deadly toxin, and a silent wife who moved with too much grace. The evidence pointed everywhere but nowhere definitive. It was a case tangled in power and appearances. He knew one thing. He needed to find out who had sent the footage. Someone was watching from the shadows, and whoever they were, they wanted the truth to be found, but on their own terms. The weight of secrets was beginning to crush the illusion that the Karam household had built. With the discovery of the toxin in Jasmine's bloodstream, Detective Adeel Rami's quiet investigation had officially turned into a homicide case. What was once considered an unfortunate case of food poisoning had evolved into a calculated act of murder. And while Haris Karam had every reason to mourn his mistress, his proximity to the crime and the hidden footage made him the prime suspect. Word spread quickly in the inner circles of Dubai's elite. Haris was questioned for hours, shown the footage from the hidden camera, and confronted with the bracelet. He didn't deny the affair. His face crumbled as he admitted to the relationship, his voice weak and ashamed. He said he had fallen into something he didn't understand, something that spiraled out of control. But when asked about Jasmine's death, he claimed ignorance. He swore he never harmed her and had no idea she was poisoned. He looked broken, but not guilty. Rehana, on the other hand, was calm. Too calm. She answered every question with clarity, offered receipts, medical records, and her personal schedule. She claimed she had no knowledge of the affair until the authorities showed her the footage. Her grief, she said, was more about betrayal than loss. But Detective Rami wasn't convinced. Her precision, her emotionless grace, it all seemed rehearsed. Forensics confirmed the digital eyes came from the foxglove plant in Rehana's garden. One leaf had been cut recently. It would have taken only a small amount to cause fatal symptoms, if injected or ingested. Rami ordered a second sweep of the house, this time more thorough. A syringe was discovered buried under the bathroom sink in the guest wing. No fingerprints. Clean, but not invisible. It had trace residue of the same toxin found in Jasmine's body. This wasn't an accident. Someone had gone to great lengths to kill her and hide it. While investigators debated between Haris and Rehana, another envelope arrived at the station. This one wasn't anonymous. It was addressed to Mariam Noorani, Rehana's closest friend. Inside was a set of printed photos. Jasmine, wearing the gold bracelet, smiling shyly beside Haris, the two seated together in what appeared to be a private garden. garden. Another photo showed Jasmine stepping out of a car, the same one Rehana used. The images had been taken over time, from a distance by someone observant and deliberate. Marani was called in for questioning. She arrived in a black abaya, visibly distressed. She claimed the photos had been mailed to her as a warning, that she had once employed Jasmine in the past and had let her go after an uncomfortable incident involving a male relative. When pressed further, Marani hesitated, then admitted something unexpected. She had once been romantically involved with Haris before his marriage to Rehana. Detective Rami began to see the cracks. This case wasn't just a triangle, it was a web. A past lover, a betrayed wife, a secret affair, and a dead maid with more influence than anyone realized. Investigators revisited Jasmine's employment history. A small note tucked away in her agency file mentioned a past dismissal for crossing boundaries with male employer's family. That male relative was Haris. Jasmine had been near him long before her employment in the Karam villa. The possibility began to emerge that Jasmine's death wasn't just about an affair. It was about unfinished business, jealousy, and reputations on the edge of collapse. Detective Rami faced mounting pressure. The media had picked up the whispers. A maid dead in a luxury villa, a high-profile marriage shattered by scandal, and a mysterious poison no one wanted to talk about. But it was the envelope that changed everything. Someone wanted the truth out, but not in the way the detective expected. It wasn't just about justice. It was personal. Someone was controlling the flow of evidence, deciding what to expose and when. The case had become a game of strategy, and Rehana, quiet and poised, was far more dangerous than anyone had assumed. As the city buzzed with whispers and speculation, Haris Karam sat in a sterile holding room, his reputation crumbling beyond repair. Once hailed as a visionary in Dubai's luxury real estate world, he now faced headlines soaked in scandal. His personal and professional life dismantled piece by piece. Though not formally charged, the police held him for questioning, building what they believed was a strong case of premeditated murder, rooted in infidelity and jealousy. He had motive, access, and a victim who could no longer speak for herself. Meanwhile, Rehana Al Safar maintained her distance from the noise, both literal and emotional. She was rarely seen outside the villa, declining interviews, ignoring social invitations, and staying silent even as the investigation intensified. Yet something about her silence continued to trouble Detective Adeel Rami. Unlike Haris, Rehana never faltered, never panicked. Her composure didn't seem like shock, it felt like something far more deliberate. With the photos, footage, and toxicology reports forming a tangled trail, Rami revisited Jasmine's final 48 hours. In the footage from the house, a new discovery emerged. An earlier recording, just one day before Jasmine's collapse. Mariam Noorani had been at the villa. She visited briefly, bringing what appeared to be a gift basket. She was alone with Jasmine for nearly 15 minutes in the kitchen, while Rehana spoke on the phone in the other room. This minor detail had gone unnoticed until now. Forensics were immediately alerted. The basket Mariam had delivered had already been discarded, but a small linen napkin used to wrap the fruit remained in the kitchen waste, carefully preserved by Rehana's meticulous staff. Lab analysis revealed faint traces of digitalis on the cloth, enough to suggest transfer but not enough for ingestion. More importantly, it placed Mariam in contact with the toxin, days before Jasmine's death. Detective Rami brought Mariam in again. This time she was not calm. Her hands trembled as she denied any wrongdoing, claiming she had no knowledge of the plant or the poison. But when confronted with her past connection to both Haris and Jasmine, especially the termination of Jasmine's employment years earlier, her facade began to crack. She broke under pressure. Mariam confessed that she had grown increasingly resentful after watching Haris, the man she once loved, build a perfect life with Rehana. When she discovered that Jasmine had re-entered their lives, possibly rekindling an old flirtation or more, something in her snapped. She saw Jasmine not just as a servant, but as a threat, a recurring disruption in her past and present. The photos she sent anonymously, the bracelet, the flash drive, all part of her calculated effort to expose the affair and ruin Haris publicly. But things spiraled. Her final visit to the villa was meant to warn Jasmine off, but as she told it, she panicked. She had brought the toxin-laced fruit as a scare tactic, intending only to make her sick, not to kill her. When Jasmine's condition deteriorated faster than expected, she watched quietly as the chaos unfolded, saying nothing. And when Haris was arrested, she remained silent, letting the investigation turn in his direction. Detective Rami realized the case was even more tragic than he imagined. Haris, though guilty of betrayal, had not killed Jasmine. Rehana, though deeply wronged, had not taken revenge. The true architect of the crime had been hiding in plain sight, a friend, a confidante, a woman consumed by decades-old bitterness. Mariam was charged with premeditated murder and obstruction of justice. The media frenzy that followed was unstoppable. The narrative shifted. Haris was released, though his reputation was permanently stained. He moved out of Dubai, retreating from the public eye. His marriage to Rehana ended quietly, without drama, finalized in silence behind legal doors. As for Rehana, she disappeared from the social scene entirely. Some said she relocated abroad, others claimed she returned to her ancestral home in Al Ain. Wherever she went, she took with her the haunting knowledge that even in a life built on control and structure, betrayal can still bleed in from the edges. And Jasmine Villacorte, whose life had intersected with wealth, love, and envy, was laid to rest in her hometown in the Philippines. Her story, once invisible, had shaken Dubai's elite to its core. In the end, it was not wealth, power, or rage that turned deadly, but the kind of jealousy that simmers quietly for years before it finally burns everything in its path.